I've been accused of perhaps spending my last year in the governor's office in terms of public addresses, utilizing the time for a statewide nostalgia tour. And while I'm tempted to do that, this audience desires a little more red meat, I think, than that. So with just a brief, I think, acknowledgement of a wonderful 7 years, we'll get to some red meat. But first, Ginger and I have been blessed by so many friends in this room, friends that are political friends, but then friends that are personal friends, in many instances both political and personal friends. It's pretty good government housing if you got to get government housing. And we will miss many parts of it. There are many parts we will not miss. Ginger is looking forward to digging in the dirt. It's therapeutic for her. She loves that. I'm glad she loves it because I did it for a living for a little while, and I don't want to ever do it again, Cliff. But Arkansas has really been good to us, and the people have been good to us. And if you're not careful, there are times when you'll get so nostalgic about it that it clogs your ability to see going forward rather than going back. And so while I think there's a lot of benefit from time to time in reflecting, and while certainly we do look back on things, both good and bad, this job and our lives should be about tomorrow, not about yesterday. What have you done for us lately? What will you do tomorrow? How can you make it better than it already is? If you ever get to the point that all you want to do is look back, I got a group of folks that I know that do that, and I'll send you to them because y'all deserve each other. So, notwithstanding a temptation to be nostalgic and talk about the last 7 years, or really, in my case of public service, 31, I want to talk about tomorrow. And I want to talk about next year and the year after and the year after. Because that's what keeps you young, and that's what your obligation really is. Most of the people in this room have, in varying degrees, made their mark in life. And whatever happens in the political and policy winds of tomorrow will not too adversely affect you personally, because most of you are well set to withstand the vagaries of good or bad public policy decisions. But most of you have kids and grandkids and nephews and nieces and other people that you care about. And so that's what this should really be all about. Now, I know you all are political junkies because you show up here all the time and you ask good questions. But you're political junkies for good reasons, because you recognize and you realize that with all its faults, with all of the elected officials who ever broke your heart, whoever stole your money or broke their promises, with all of the negatives that exist, this is still the greatest form of self-government ever invented on this planet. And it works better with an educated electorate. It works better with an involved and engaged electorate. If I could transplant your brains and your passion for this stuff and carve it up and divide it up and make it replicate to hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Arkansans, we would be better off. regardless of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, man or woman, black or white, northwest or southeast, or any other demographic difference, you give me an educated electorate and I'll trust their judgment. Well, I won't always agree with their judgment, but I will trust their judgment. So I urge you to step out of your shell in the course of the next year and pick somebody who is unengaged in this process. Somebody who's a friend of yours or a relative of yours that maybe doesn't vote, doesn't care, doesn't know, doesn't want to know. And one person at a time, change that and engage them and involve them. Because it's through that methodology that we will continue to build the state we love and worry about tomorrow, our kids and our grandkids. We've got some important issues facing us, and the one that continues to dominate the headlines is the private option, and the reason it dominates the headlines in no small part is because of the effect on the budget. So y'all have heard some of this before. I'm going to go back through some of it again, then we'll save plenty of time for Helen Thomas to ask the first question. Y'all know Helen Thomas, don't you? Stand up, Helen. And we'll try to save sufficient time for questions. Look, I don't care whether you like Obamacare or don't like Obamacare, whether you are for all the altruistic reasons or negative about all of the deficit reasons. All of those issues that dominate the headlines on a national scale about the worth or lack thereof of the Affordable Health Care Act are things that Arkansas cannot change by herself. Those are issues for Washington, D.C. If you don't like it, go up there and change it. If you do like it, go up there and keep it. That's a decision that has to be made in Washington, D.C. Now, we were faced then with huge ideological divides, as you might imagine, and huge demographic divides when this decision came to Arkansas. Because you see, what happened was, and this is the way courts are, you never know what the heck they're going to do. But all this was challenged in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and everybody's thought, well, U.S. Supreme Court's going to declare it unconstitutional, or they're going to declare it constitutional. So what did the Supreme Court do? Kinda. They said it's all constitutional, except the part about Medicaid expansion is optional for the states. You can take it or not take it. What's created then this whole political issue in all of our sister states about whether or not we do or don't do this. So you get to looking at it for Arkansas, and you get to asking some questions. Well, first of all, how are we paying for this? It's not a free lunch. Federal money is still our money, right? And so how are we paying for this? Well, you're paying for it, and I'm paying for it. The taxpayers are paying for it all over the country. And another big chunk of it's coming from our hospitals. Dan Ron's back there. Ask him. He'll tell you. And the reason it's coming from the hospitals is that the federal government, to help pay for the people now who would be paying hospitals, because they'd have coverage now where they were uncovered before, where it was uncompensated care before, to help offset that, they reduced Medicare. Now, don't get nervous. They didn't stop your Medicare. But they reduced Medicare reimbursements to hospitals to help pay for Medicaid payments to hospitals that would replace uncompensated care, okay? The problem is they reduced more Medicare reimbursements than they paid in Medicaid expansion. For example, Dan's back there. I'll use him as an example. I happen to know his off the top of my head. It means $28 million a year alone just to UAMS. $28 million a year difference between doing the private option and not doing it. Did y'all hear that? That's real. And you can take that amount of money and interpolate it. That's a proper word, Judge. Interpolate, not interpret. You can do the calculations. Or as we used to say in Amazon, do the math. Really, we said do the arithmetic. And that is applicable to every hospital in Arkansas in varying degrees, depending upon their size and their patient mix. Now, that's going to happen whether we take it or not. So you're going to take money away from hospitals and not give them anything in return. That's one issue. Secondly, what all this stuff does is charges certain businesses penalties if they don't carry insurance. And a lot of them won't. And I think it was the state chamber, I don't remember who it was, but somebody came out with the numbers and the estimated tax increase to Arkansas small businesses if we don't do the private option, $38 million a year. In other words, they're freed up by $38 million a year. Now, if we don't take it, you're still paying for it. And the analogy I continue to use over and over is a simple analogy that anybody can understand. I started to say something more pejorative about who could understand it, but I said anybody can understand it. It's akin to, currently, you pay about 18.5 cents a gallon in federal gas tax every time you put a gallon of gas in your tank. Not doing this is like telling the federal government, oh, don't send us any of our gas tax money back under the federal highway program. Send Arkansas's money to New York or California. Their roads need it. We don't. We're in good shape. Don't need any of our own tax money back. We actually get more back than we pay in. So we're going to pay for it. Our hospitals are going to pay for it. Our businesses are going to pay for it. And that doesn't even count the fact that now you're going to have anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 people that are for the first time going to have health care, and what that does to your premiums, because I chaired a hospital board for 10 years. I know what you have to do. When you give away 10%, 15%, 20%, 25% free medicine to people who don't have insurance and can't pay, you make it up somewhere, or you end up closing your doors, and you make it up because you shift costs to the rest of us, you and me, and our insurance rates, because you're driving up your costs to shift them. So it didn't just help the people that are getting this insurance, it helped the rest of us that are paying. So all of that logic, together with the altruistic reason of providing some people health care that are working people, this is primarily the working folks, lends itself to the argument that you ought to do it. And this is a nonpartisan deal, people. I have never been more proud of Republicans and Democrats working together and showing Washington, D.C. how you can get together, put your heads together, and solve problems than I have been over this legislature doing exactly this. It was Republican legislative leaders that helped fashion this. It's what I call the traditional business Republicans that helped fashion this. Now, there was a split in the Republican Party between what the press refers to as the Tea Party Republicans versus the traditional business Republicans, but even a lot of Tea Party Republicans voted for it. Maybe not a lot, but a few. Now, you compound that with the fact that under Arkansas's Constitution it takes a 3/4 vote. I want to say that again. Can't y'all declare that unconstitutional tomorrow? I got me some judges over here I'm going to talk to in a minute. But seriously, it takes a 3/4 vote to pass the appropriation to spend this money. 3/4 is hard to get for motherhood. So you take a program that is not popular in Arkansas. The polls suggest it's not popular in Arkansas, the National Health Care Act. Incidentally, private option is more popular than unpopular, according to the polls. But you take that, and you couple that with a 3/4 requirement, and you can see the obstacle that has to be overcome. Well, it was. It was. It was overcome in a bipartisan manner with a lot of logic and a lot of thinking. Now, this is where it really gets tricky. As a result of that, we saved between $80 and $90 million estimated in GR that we would otherwise be spending either to hospitals or to agencies or to other folks that we pay out for uncompensated care. Now, we didn't remove all of the money for uncompensated care, notwithstanding what Dan Ron thinks. We didn't remove all of it, but we reduced substantial portions of it, because if they're going to get paid for it now, why should the taxpayers continue to give them money for uncompensated care, right? So it's say that together with a portion, not a huge amount, but a certain portion of existing Medicaid people could be moved legally under the federal law over to the private option, which took us from a 30% cost to a 0% cost on Medicaid for that same population. Saves between $80 and $90 million a year. You with me? I feel like a professor right now instead of a governor. So the legislature said, and I went along with it, I'm responsible, equally responsible, mine may be more so than they, but the legislature said, if we're going to save $80 and $90 million, let's give it back to the people. And they did, in the form of tax cuts. So effective in July, we're going to have between $80 and $90 million in tax cuts. Now, they went too far, because in 2016, they got $140 million in tax cuts that we told them they can't afford, but I'll let Ross or Hutchinson or Coleman or one of them other people, Hobbs or one of them other people worry about that. I told them. I'll say, I told you so. But at any rate, come July, we're going to have $80 to $90 million worth of tax cuts predicated on the savings from the private option. Now, if you don't continue the private option, you're going to repeal the tax cuts? I don't believe that. Politically, I don't think they're going to do that. Anybody here believe that? I got some oceanfront property in Arizona. Isn't there a song? So that means you're going to have an $80 to $90 million hole in the budget. Now, right now, we've got about $45 million in my proposed budget of new money that we can put somewhere. Not 80 or 90. And of that $45 million, a chunk of it's got to go to prisons, because you see what's going on. We've got 2,700 people right now backed up in county jails because of changes in parole laws that are locking more people up for not obeying their parole laws. And as a result of that, we owe the counties a bunch of money. We need to open some more prison bed space, or we are in a world of hurt. And you know who inevitably gets killed every time you start cutting budgets? Higher ed. You just heard what Rex said about our need. Education and economic development are the way we solve problems. It's the way you stay out of prison. That's the way you contribute instead of take from society. That's the way you have better jobs and pay more money in rather than taking more money out. That's how you worry about your kids and your grandkids, and that's how you worry about tomorrow. Cutting off our nose to spite our face by hurting higher education is a self-defeating exercise. And that's just the tip of things. Where else is it going to come from? Then you couple that with this. A lot of the opponents, and rightly so, justifiable criticism against what the federal government did was they misled people about being able to keep their own insurance. You remember that? And a lot of our own folks said, you can't tell somebody something and then go back on it. And if you take it away now, after these over 100,000 people are getting this health care, you're going to tell them July 1st it stops, we're going to take it away from you? And the very people that argued not to go back on stuff would sound hypocritical if they did that very same thing to over 100,000 Arkansans. It is bigger than just the private option. It affects sheriffs. Doc Holliday's back here. He heard me talk about that yesterday. It affects counties. It affects cities. It affects colleges and universities. It affects everybody, save and except K through 12, which is sacrosanct and which has a special place. But you don't want to put pressure on that either. So that's the message I've kind of been preaching lately. I need to preach it again because they got to have something to write. And since I've said basically the same thing for a number of months now, they can just go back and punch that button on their computer and just redo it without a lot of further fanfare. But it's an important issue that faces us as a people. And if it fails, it will fail by a small, small margin. And if it fails, it will still be supported by an overwhelming majority of the members of the General Assembly. Because it takes at least 75 out of 100 in the House and 27 out of 35 in the Senate to make this happen. And 74 out of 100 is still a lot, but it's not enough. And 26 out of 35 is still a lot, but it's not enough.